When the iPad Pro was about to be released, Tim Cook said, why would anyone buy a PC when they could just buy the iPad Pro? Now, after using it for a few days, I gotta say that even though the iPad Pro is a pretty great device, there's still a lot of things about it that make it not be able to replace most people's normal PCs. But after those few days of using it, it is pretty clear that a device like this, even though it might not be this one, is going to come along and start changing the way everyone uses their normal computers. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of already happening, and we carry it in our pocket every single day. But here we're talking about the desktop replacement, something that's going to come along and take away the keyboard and mouse with a big display and bring you something more portable but equally as powerful. There are some things to consider here. First and foremost, and this one is very important, is that if you're watching this video, these types of products are most likely not marketed towards you. If you play PC games or you edit video or you design or develop and do those things as your job or a very strong hobby, these kind of devices just aren't for you. They have other computers out there and those are the ones that you should get. But for the vast majority of people, these kind of devices could replace their computer. Honestly, think about it. What do most people do that you can't do on a mobile OS? You can go on the internet, you can read email, you can go on Facebook, all the things that most normal people do, and again, that's probably not you, but most normal people do, they work just fine here. So why is the tablet the future? Well, if we go back and think about it, the first home computers that we had, you had to enter code with a keyboard and the computer did things. But then we moved on to the graphical user interface and we had a mouse. And this was just an easier way to get around. We didn't have to type in code anymore and it was much more efficient. And now, after all those years, we're starting to move on to the next generation, and that's multi-touch. Now, we're all totally used to it with our phones, of course, but it is a much easier way to interact because you no longer have a peripheral that you're using, you're going directly to the source, and it's just much more efficient. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the smartphone is so successful, but one is that it's so portable and compact and you can take it with you everywhere. And the reason that's possible is because you can directly interact with what's on the screen and you don't need anything else extra. Tablets take the smartphone idea and blow it up and make it more powerful. Tablets are thin, they're getting pretty powerful, and they're very easy to carry around. Now you might ask, we already have laptops, so why would we need something else, especially when the laptops right now are doing so well and they're really good? That's where there's kind of a conundrum. The laptops right now are just so good that there's no real reason not to get one. There's one thing though that I do think is going to finally push it over, and that's the children that are growing up today. So for them, they can pick up a tablet or smartphone and start using it pretty quickly, and we've all seen those videos online of little babies using these devices. It's pretty incredible. Now think about when they grow up. The idea of using an external peripheral to interact with their device is going to be as weird as us using just the virtual version. It's going to be that same thing but just flip. Right now we just have those decades of past that we're all used to, and it's really hard to step over to that next generation. So what's holding it back from happening sooner? Well, I think that one main issue is that there's just a perception around tablets and these kind of devices that they just aren't real computers. I think most people think they do more on their computers than they actually do. They think they want the highest specs and the most ports and all this kind of stuff, but really all they do is go on the internet and go on Facebook and answer email. That's what they do, but they don't feel like they could do that on a tablet just because of perception. There is one more legitimate thing though, and I think it plays back to that perception thing, and that's the apps. Now the apps that are available in these mobile OSs are getting very powerful and they're very good, but they don't exactly replace what we're used to on the desktop, and that's probably the biggest issue right now. Now again, for most people out there, these apps don't really matter, but the idea that you can't even get those apps no matter what leads to that perception that these computers are limited in some way. So even though most people are never going to actually use those apps, they still want the ability to do it, and that's why they can't invest so much money in a tablet computer. This is where we get to the Microsoft Surface line. So if you look at any iPad Pro video, if we go down in the comments, everyone is going to be saying, why don't you just buy a Surface Pro 4? And for a lot of people, I'd say that yes, if you're on the Windows side of things, just go buy a Surface Pro 4, you're going to be happy. It's an excellent computer. But is it an excellent mobile computer? Not really. Here's my thinking on this. What Microsoft is trying to do is incorporate a laptop and a tablet into one. They want to have a mobile OS and a desktop OS in one, and that's what they're doing with Windows 10. And Windows 10 is pretty great, but there is some issues with that. One of the things that people are wanting Apple to do is do what Microsoft is doing and just add multi-touch to their normal desktop OS. But there's a few reasons why they shouldn't do that and why the Microsoft Surface just isn't as good as a normal optimized tablet OS. Now let's think back to where I talked about the different generations of computers that we've had. The computers that we have right now are specifically built to be used with a mouse and keyboard. When you add multi-touch to them, even though technically it does work, it isn't an optimized experience, and in the end isn't actually moving anything forward. You're just doing the same thing, but in a more difficult way. The reason I say this is because the way a mobile OS is designed is different from the way a desktop OS is designed, and that's because you're inputting in different ways. So if you look at everything in the desktop OS, the touch points, or what you would be clicking with your mouse, are very small because you have a very precise pointer. But if you go over to the mobile side, you're using your fingers, so everything is much easier to touch. So if you implement touch onto a desktop OS, it's much harder because your fingers are much bigger than a mouse and it makes it much less precise. That spills over into everything you do on the computer. So if you have the apps, even though you might have the full version of Photoshop, it won't work as well because it's not optimized for touch. And that's kind of why the Surface line in the mobile space is not working right now, because they just don't have app support. But bringing that all back together, the reason why the iPad Pro isn't really working right now is because we don't have those desktop apps optimized for the mobile OS, which is what we really need to drop that stigma. One of the reasons this is happening very slowly is because it's hard to charge a lot of money for an application that you're going to get on your mobile platform. People just don't want to pay it. So we're going to have to work through that, and eventually it'll get there, but right now it's not. Once those apps finally get there, that stigma of a tablet not being a real computer will finally start to be lifted, and that's when I think these computers will start to be more mainstream than they already are. Here's where I kind of see all this playing out when we finally reach the end point. We're gonna have our smartphones and we're gonna use those pretty much as we already do. And then we're gonna have our tablets, and that's gonna be like we have our laptop or a desktop, but just in a multi-touch form. And then for some people, probably not most people, but for some people, they're gonna have a hub at home where you can connect all those devices together, and it's gonna be more archival than anything. It's not really gonna be your main computer, it's just gonna be something that you can kind of dump everything on. This really isn't a new idea, and Microsoft is kind of doing it right now, but they just don't have that smartphone component to really get it going. But that's why I think the iPad Pro is kind of a glimpse at the future. We're not quite there yet, but eventually we're gonna start moving away from everything we're used to and moving on to the new generation. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any comments or different suggestions or different ideas, be sure to leave those down in the comments below. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think of this. If you want to see more videos like this or just other content, be sure to hit subscribe so you can see when those are out, and also follow me on all the social media. All the links will be down in the description so you can stay up to date with the channel. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Matt, and I will see you in my next video. See ya!